All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining Adoptee Bridge for another Who We Are panel. I know that we are waiting for some more people to come on in, as well as I think one more of our panelists. So while we're just waiting for a few more people to join us, just a little bit more of housekeeping items. We'll be utilizing the chat box tonight. So I don't know if in these times of COVID, if a lot of you listening or watching are used to using Zoom, but the chat box function is located on your toolbar. And depending on if you're calling in or watching from a Mac, a PC, a tablet, a phone, it'll be located on various areas on your device. So it may be located at the top of the screen or the side or the bottom, but we'll be utilizing the chat box. So feel free to utilize the chat box at any time to ask a question. Our panelists will be taking questions at the end portion of our panel today. And so what we'll be doing is I'll just be collecting all of the questions, and then again at the end of our time, we'll be asking all of our panelists these questions. So if you just have a thought that comes up, that pops up, feel free just to type it on into the chat box. If you have any technical difficulties, I mean, I'll try my best to answer your questions via the chat box, but unfortunately, I'm not the most technologically gifted person, but two, there's really not much that we can do on our end. So apologies, the best thing that I could probably suggest is just log back out and log back on in, just to see if that helps with the difficulties that you're having. So without further ado, what I'm going to first do is ask our panelists if they would be comfortable and willing to turn on their videos so they can start with their introductions for today. And I'm going to end my screen in 1 second. There we go.
Hi, I can introduce myself to start us off.
Emma's gonna do it. Great, thank you, Emma. While I do the rest of everybody else.
Was there something you wanted us to share?
Just a brief introduction about you and who you are, and if you would like to give more about your adoption story and background, where you're calling in from.
Sure. Hi, my name is Emma Wexler. I use she, her, hers pronouns. Right now I'm in Providence, Rhode Island. I grew up in Minnesota. I was adopted from Vietnam at the age of 1. I had a lot of trouble finding the Zoom link for this meeting and a lot of pre-moment panic. I have been with Adoptees for Justice for 2 years. I work as the outreach and communications coordinator, as well as a volunteer and a board member. And I just want to say thank you for putting this together and having us all on to talk tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Emma. And thank you all so much, panelists, for joining us and for your patience. Again, I'm not very technologically gifted. All right, and AJ, I'll continue working with you with your video. Oh, there you are. All right. So who would like to go next after Emma? Emma just did her wonderful introduction. Mia? Okay.
I can, yeah, sure. My name is Mia Ives Rubley, currently living in Greensboro, North Carolina. I am a Korean adoptee with citizenship, and currently work volunteer with Adoptees for Justice and talk about adoption quite a bit on Twitter, I guess. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mia, and welcome. All right, so 2 down and 3 left.
Sure, I'll go. Hey, everybody. Thanks, Christine, for hosting us. I'm AJ Bryant. I'm adopted from India. I'm one of 3 siblings adopted from India. None of us are blood related. I live in Washington, D.C. I've been a part of Adoptees for Justice for maybe 2 years also, I think now. I also, like Mia, I do a lot of talking about adoption on Twitter and in other panels and other venues. I have citizenship. Thanks.
I'll go next. My name is Anissa Drugito. I am a deported adoptee. I'm in Central America, Panama right now. I don't have citizenship, obviously, and I work with Adoptees for Justice to try to get this word out as much as I can.
Hi, I'm Olivia. Thank you so much for having me as well. I'm currently living in New York City. I am a transnational, transracial adoptee from Russia. I was adopted at 18 months old. I have citizenship as well. I'm currently an organizer at NAPAWF, the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum in New York. And I work at the intersection of immigration, healthcare, and economic justice, as well as a proud member of Adoptees for Justice.
Great, thank you all so much. And again, I am just so pleased that the 5 of you took time out of your days to join us and to share more about your experiences, as well as Emma to share more about your thesis, and as well as all of you for joining us tonight to learn more about this very important topic about not only adoptees' identities as immigrants, but adoptees and the Citizenship Act. But before we dive right on into the panelists talking more about their experiences, Emma, I would like to invite to share more about your honors thesis. It's going to talk more about adoptees, Asian American adoptees, and our identities as immigrants. So that's the first part of this panel. And then the second part of the panel will be talking more with the panelists about the work they do, a lot of the volunteers that they do, and the volunteer work that they do. And then of course, if you have any questions, you can most certainly type them in the chat question box at any time. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Emma. And then Emma, you can take control of everything from now until the end of your presentation.
All right, yep, I was muted. No, wait, I don't want to share. Okay. Thank you so much, Christine, for this opportunity to share about my thesis. So the title is monstrously long, Invisible Immigrants, the Politics of Transnational, Racial, Asian American Adoptees. If you're not familiar with the adoptee community, you might ask, wait, slow down. There's a lot of terms there, so we'll just break it down really quick. Adoptees are people who have different legal parents than they were born with. The types of adoption are a lot, but this presentation and research really focused on transnational and transracial adoptees. Transnational means you're adopted by parents of a different nationality. Transracial means that the parent and the child have different racial backgrounds. Because of the dynamics of adoption, the majority of international transracial adoption features white parents who are adopting children of color. And transnational adoption, although it's little discussed, has really been around for a long time, since about 1948, and moving into the Korean War. You might ask why I wrote a really long thesis. Really, I think it comes out of a personal journey. I was trying to understand, how I was born in Vietnam. I grew up in Minnesota in a white, Jewish, loving American family, and really trying to understand, that kind of a journey and kind of figure that out. So I went to college. I got into Asian American studies, ethnic studies, and I was really frustrated by the invisibility of Asian American adoptees in the United States, as well as the invisibility of adoptees in all types of areas in the conversation of our experiences in adoption, in US history, immigration, race, social justice conversations. And I guess translated that into a very long thesis about what I felt was a really pressing political moment around race and immigration since the election of, or since the Trump administration began in early 2017. all of my thesis sort of sprung out of this general question of what does it mean to be an Asian adoptee in 2019? And I won't get into too much of what these articles and headlines show, but what I find interesting here is that this answer, even though being very basic, was a lot to unpack. What I found in the literature was very lacking. A lot of language around adoption is framed as an act of charity. There's a lot of white saviorism. It's not really talked about as much as I would like in conversation with issues of racism, poverty, reproductive injustice. It often neglects adoptees as empowered subjects, and that comes from, a history of research on transracial adoption, overrepresenting the opinions of adoptive parents and not, prioritizing lived experience. It often examines adoptees from one country rather than trying to think of, our broader communities as a whole. Just to limit myself, I thought I would look at Asian American adoptees. And there was a very, very little about adoptees coming to understand themselves as immigrants or the type of activism, particularly for the international community within the United States. I wrote a really long thesis. To summarize, this talk is just going to focus on the second chapter, Involuntary Immigrants, Adoptable Children, and Deportable Adults. And I'm really just going to try and answer 3 basic questions through this. And if you come away understanding a bit more about those, I'll pat myself on the back and call it a night. The first would be, why am I calling transnational adoptees invisibilized immigrants? The second is, why are increasing numbers of Asian American adoptees coming to see themselves as immigrants within the last several years? Basically, what changed? And what tensions do we get out of a rising or an emerging adoptee immigrant identity? So how I did this research is through ethnography. I participated in a lot of adoptee spaces. I wrote a lot about what I saw and experienced, and then I did interviews with about 13 different individuals who identified as transnational, transracial Asian American adoptees, and recorded about 27 hours we talked for 27 hours between, those months, August 2019 to January 2020. The field for ethnographic fieldwork is kind of interesting for adoptees because I think in the way that adoptees are very diasporic, we are distributed wherever we are placed, right, into different families across the United States. And so virtual spaces were really important, but I also had the opportunity to go to DC a couple of times, to go to a national adoptee conference. And it was, it looks different, I think, than other sort of ethnographic experiences.
Hey, Emma.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting, but are you trying to share or show us something on the screen?
Yeah, I thought I was showing a presentation, but was I not doing that?
No, but we're seeing your lovely face. So
it's very hard because when I try and share the screen, it just like pops it into full screen, so then I can't see the Zoom window.
Okay.
But let me try that again. Thanks for letting me know. That would have been really awkward if that continued.
Well, actually, one of the attendees just let us know. So.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Although I just keep it like this. Oh my God, I don't want to write and annotate. Okay, how's that?
Awesome.
Okay, it was just a bunch of boring words anyway, so I don't think we missed anything. Just to say I wrote a really big thesis and we're not going to talk about it, which is good. Okay, so these are kind of the different spaces that I was in. But to back up, international adoption has been around since like the late 40s. There have been over 275,000 adoptions, and for the Asian adoptee population, that's somewhere over 200,000. The majority of those adoptees come from South Korea. The next largest, group is from China, and then you have, small amounts from other countries. And interestingly, I also want to just point out that adoptions tend to go, that children tend to go towards countries that have more resources, that are more affluent, and who have not been destabilized by poverty or war. Interestingly, the US also sends children for international adoption to Scandinavia, and they're mostly Black children who are not treated fairly in the system. Here we go. So adoptees as invisible immigrants. There have been over 70 years of US adoptive Asian migration and over 200,000 Asian American adoptees, but we are really invisible in all of the scholarship on US history on trans-Pacific migration, in Asian American studies, in the conversations around the Cold War, and we are deeply ingrained in all of these issues. I think we're really invisible to other immigrant communities, and we're also very often invisible to ourselves, both as immigrants and in general. It's very hard to find the adoptee community. And I also want to make a distinction between acknowledging, like, yes, I'm Asian, and or yes, I'm an immigrant, and really, reconciling that identity and kind of coming to terms with it. You get a lot of technically, I'm an immigrant, but, and then this whole talk is supposed to sort of describe and kind of unpack, all that stuff in there. The other thing is that the adoptee community is not tracked by the census after we reach adulthood, and adoptees who are deported are not tracked by ICE. So then also determining the limits and the size of the community is also really difficult. One of the reasons why adoptees are not talked about as an immigrant group has been suggested by Hyung Kim, and she describes us as immigrants of singularity. She describes that because adoptees immigrate as individuals rather than within a family unit, they're thought to be easily assimilated and absorbed. And they also don't constitute a threat to the cultural or racial identity of like a European dominated white America. And so even when, we're thinking about adopting, say, me from Vietnam, I'm a Wexler before I even migrate. I've already had an American identity reconceptualized for me before I go. And so it's a different thing. And that's also a reason why Asian adoptees have not triggered, yellow peril, fear of yellow horde that was a prominent feature of like the 1870s onwards in the United States, even though, there have been hundreds of thousands of us come. Another reason why adoptees often haven't identified as immigrants is that, and I'll discuss this a little bit more through the legislation, hopefully not too in detail, but from its inception, American transnational adoption has always erased adopted Asian children as adopted, as Asians, and as immigrants. Through the law, in its first instance, we were rewritten to be called natural-born alien children. In 50 speak, that's just erasing that we are adopted and saying legally we should have the same rights as, natural-born children. And if you read the testimony of the Senate when they're trying to create a passage for Asian children to come to the United States, they're already conceptualizing them as the best possible Americans, meaning that they're already Americanized. They're going to become, good red-blooded, American boys and girls. So there's an assumption of high assimilation. And again, that we're not going to be threatening because we are not going to be able to retain a different vision of America, different cultural practice, et cetera. I don't need to go into all this, but the point that I'm trying to make here is that the way that the United States has always crafted its immigration law has been in relationship to race and to citizenship. So in 1790, they, after decades of having free immigration and free borders, they determined that citizenship is only for free white persons. And that's an important designation to make when you have racial slavery as a political system that props up your economy. This starts expanding to be for birthright citizenship after the Civil War. But importantly, Asians are still racially ineligible for naturalization. So race still matters towards who can become a citizen. We have 70 years, starting in 1875, of Chinese exclusion, where Asian people are not allowed to migrate or extremely racially restricted from migrating. And then in 1924, we get a system of national quotas, but the way that they determine how many immigrants can come from so-and-so country is heavily determined on how Congress believes that their racial makeup of the country looks. So Europeans get really large quotas, Southern Europeans get less large quotas, Asians and Africans in South Americans get very, very, very small quotas, and so on. This starts to change with refugee as America starts believing itself to be a humanitarian leader and opening up the doors for refugees to come in. I'll just say that to point out the depths of anti-Asian exclusion in relationship to immigration in the United States, when they allowed 460 Korean children to take visas, only constituting 12% of the entire program, that was the largest Korean migration in decades, right? And so all this is to say that adoptees have always positioned as very exceptional subjects within immigration law. In 1950, when you get the first sustained Korean adoption program, this is happening at a time when, again, Asians have not been allowed to migrate to the US for 80 years. This is happening at a time when the United States is extremely segregated. And to have an interracial family is really revolutionary in a good way, and also in a way that will be problematic for their, these adoptees' racial identities moving forward. It's not until, I'll just remind us, it's not until 1967 that Loving v. Virginia repeals anti-miscegenation statutes on 15 states, right? This is part of, smack dab in the middle of, the United States going through a lot of shifts around civil rights. And in 1965, that's when you get Asian migration allowed to happen again, when they do away with the national quota system. So it's important to see how adoptees are allowed to immigrate at a time when non-adopted, everything being the same, non-adopted folks are not allowed to migrate, and how adoptees first come in as migrants, as refugees, and then are put into a special category of family reunification. And that's how we are both within the immigration system, but we have access to a very privileged path to it. We, even now, the adoptee visas are IR, which stands for immediate relative. Other reasons why adoptees have not identified as immigrants are the way that we often think about immigration here is this idea of the American dream. We think of someone who decided to immigrate, and perhaps they or their, if you're the child of immigrants, you see your family struggling with language, with culture, with trying to make a life in a country with a different culture. And adoptees, because of the exorbitant cost of international adoption, tend to end up predominantly in white families with a certain amount of financial security. And so they don't experience these things that have become characteristic or hallmarks to a dominant notion of what being an immigrant looks like. The other reason is a long-standing tradition of closed adoption and the idea that adoptees should be a blank slate, meaning that because adoption is stigmatized, there's a lot of secrecy in adoption placements, that adopted kids you don't emphasize their identities before they were adopted, their histories and their past, and it's really about being a part of the new family, the new adoptive family. And so if their parents are not immigrants, you're not going to be encouraged to identify in a way that's different than them, or it could even be discouraged, or it could be unintentional, right? And that sort of also dovetails with ideas of colorblindness, of not recognizing racism or race, and along with that, not recognizing immigration status. One other reason might be that the adoptee community is fairly young, even though there have been folks speaking out about their experience since the 80s and 90s. Coming together, I think, is something that is still being worked out and established. And so, not having exposure to alternative ways to identify or, language to articulate our experiences are also key factors here. Okay, so now I'm going to switch over to 3 factors for why we have this new emergence of an adoptee immigrant identity. The first is that the Trump administration has released a lot of racist, xenophobic discourse and has continuously, through policy changes and trying to terminate different programs, has tried to attack the immigrant community. I would argue that this activates a sense of race and citizenship. The second point is around increased awareness about the deportations of adoptees without citizenship. Although that has been happening since at least 1999, I would argue that a lot of adoptees did not know about it until around the mid-2010s or afterwards. And then the third thing that I'll talk about are family separations that happened between 2017 and 2018 and are still clearly an issue that is not over with, that hasn't been fixed or resolved yet. But I would argue that the family separations, the visceral response that it triggers, has generated an urgency to adoptees' involvement with the immigrant rights movement. So the election of Donald Trump has heralded a lot of different policy actions that have, triggered adoptees to think more, to be more aware of their racial identity, to be more aware of their origins, being born somewhere else and coming to this country, of being naturalized. Some of these include, creating, trying to terminate the DACA program, increasing deportations of Cambodian families by like 280%, trying to abolish birthright, talking about abolishing birthright citizenship, creating an office to denaturalize citizens. These are all sort of things that in the news and who have activated a lot of amazing activism from the immigrant rights community that also sort of affect adoptees as we think about, our identities and our futures. And Grant was an adoptee that I spoke to, and he said he drew a very direct line to all of these actions. He said, when is it going to start happening to us? Because it's not far away from people doing it, to people seeking refuge, to people that are already here, and to people who came there when they were kids. There's a line, I think, that the adoptee community sits in a potentially dangerous position if this continues. Moving on.
There was a request for you to share your a slide. And Ryan, could you let us know which slide it was? I think it was before Grant's quote.
This one?
Was it this one? Ryan, if this is the correct slide, let us know. Say yes, no.
You can see my screen, right? That's working?
Yes, we can see your screen. Oh, perfect. He says, yep. Awesome.
Should I move on now?
Are we good, Ryan?
I can also send out a version of this afterwards.
Sure, yeah, that'd be great. I have all the emails, so yep. If you're comfortable doing that, I can share it out with everybody who's here.
Okay. Am I good to move on?
Somebody says, yay, that's great, share.
Okay, great. Talking about adoptees without citizenship, there have been numerous stories, I think, that since 2010 and afterwards have started to circulate both within the adoptee community and outside. Certainly, all the A4J folks know that you will always meet someone who's never heard of this issue before. But in terms of increased recognition and awareness, I think the 2015 campaign for the Adoptee Citizenship Act did a lot towards increasing that. So A4J is aware of at least 50 adoptees who've been deported to a number of countries, and they're aware of adoptees without citizenship coming from over or at least 28 different countries. Beyond the actual numbers, it's very difficult to quantify, again, because of the lack of counting, because of these numbers only come from folks who've reached out to advocacy organizations or who've had their stories published in the news. There are a lot of articles around different attempts made to fix this issue, attempts that draw a lot of headlines around the fates of different adoptees, and the issue continues to sort of rage on. Here's a quote from an interview with an adoptee who I think shows kind of the mindset change that happens for folks who do have citizenship when they understand that that could easily have not been the case. I'll just read a portion of it, but May says, after I read his article, my mindset changed. I had to change it to I'm an immigrant. If he can be deported, so can I, right? And even if I legally have citizenship, it's just this idea. The reason why you're seeing so many adoptees jump at this call to action is because a lot of us realized it could have been us. We could have been screwed over, we could have abandoned, and none of that was in our control. So I identify now as an immigrant because I realize just how lucky I am. I think that a lot of adoptees figured out that random chance. I think we're always contending with the possible alternate futures that we could have had we not been adopted, had we been somewhere else, if we'd grown up with our first families, all of these things. And this sort of hones in, why adoptees have started paying attention in a big way. Talking about the next point of family separation, which started with a pilot program in 2017 and then turned into and then became a full-fledged program for a few months in 2018 and officially technically ended in May of 2018. Essentially what it was the Trump administration decided to enforce jail time for illegal crossings of the border, even against folks who had valid asylum claims. What that did was that if they had traveled with children, they're having a misdemeanor enforced on them, having jail time meant that they couldn't have custody of their child. Their child went to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. After they got out of jail, they were then put in ICE detainment, where they still didn't have custody of their child And in a lot of cases, that child would end up in state custody or Office of Refugee Resettlement custody. If it was over 15 months, they could then press for the termination of parental rights and a potential where that child would then be adopted. So this issue, and specifically sort of the media spectacle where, the airwaves were dominated by cries of children, cries of babies. There were reports of, folks harming themselves or being forced to give up their valid claims of asylum or risk their child being adopted, were very emotionally distressing, both for the general public, but I will argue that it also was very motivating for adoptees and very gut-wrenching because of the ways in which I think adoptees have experienced, separation from their primary caregiver and really got us in the adoptee feels. So here's a quote from an interview with an adoptee named Sandra. She explains, that she's been weeping and crying on a daily basis, and she connects it directly to, I have already experienced that terror and devastation as an adoptee. She goes on to talk about, to identify her unique experience and her story that she found out through reunion, to be one of being stolen, and saying that it is very similar to the adoptees or to the children who were separated at the border through zero tolerance. She makes a distinction between the way in which we talk about adoption, international adoption, as normalized, happening over decades, versus an acute and traumatic zero tolerance issue that is like dominating the Democratic National Conference, dominating the airwaves, continuing to be in the public eye. And she talks about the lack of choice for her first family and for the children whose parents are not able to care for them because they've been separated, as similarly being marginalized in their ability to parent. And then what's interesting here to me is that she then connects this to a reason why immigrant rights, talking about family separation, speaking out about what was happening at the border, is part of the adoptee activism and part of the conversation and conversations that adoptees need to be part of. She says adoptees need to speak out, not just about what's happening at the border, but what has happened to us. I've talked about my activism for me is a way to reclaim my narrative and to speak out now because I wasn't able to as a child. I think these are, the messy situations in international adoption. It's the adoption that generates the IR visa that allows the migration to happen. In these cases, it is the migration, the idea of doing it wrong, the idea of enforcing the border and how that ends up playing out, that then triggers these children's availability for adoption. And so I think she's really kind of pulling at the resonances between those experiences. All of these three things have sort of led to our politicizing experiences that have led to a growing, nucleus of adoptees who identify as immigrants. But I also want to point out the way that these are also very unique and distinct. Perhaps it's still a complicated, ambiguous identity. Even if, you're politically there, there's also a lot of differences to that experience. Just quickly, there's a continued sense of involuntaries, both around adoption and around migration. I spoke with an adoptee, and these are all pseudonyms, sorry. All these are when I say Sandra and May, these are all pseudonyms. Lorelei said, growing up, you think of immigrants as people who have made a choice to come to this country, whereas I just feel like I just happened to come here. But it wasn't like I chose to come here for a chance at a better life. I just sort of arrived. And even knowing that, folks who are deemed as immigrants, who are not categorized as fleeing or asylum seekers, I think we should also attend to there's a lot of indirect consequences for, why people have to leave or why they make decisions to leave that are not necessarily recognized. But that is a common theme that I saw across most of my interviews, was the sense of being an involuntary immigrant, not really having a lot of pride in it yet. And then the second is the way that we have experienced a privileged route to immigration, as coming here as children, coming here as, gaining immediate relative visas that are non-quota. There's not a limit to them, they're just given. As much as we might be marginalized, May says, and discriminated against and experience a lot of systemic racism here in the US, as far as citizenship, a lot of us have skipped the line. And then she goes on to talk about the cultural fluency that, a compressed assimilation in one generation has. and how that can yield benefits. What's not in the quote is the other explanation of, the loss and the pain that is also associated with it. But those are also important distinctions to make in terms of how adoptees are choosing to claim the identity of an immigrant while still trying to be mindful of the big differences too in their experience and the different ways in which they've had access to resources or not. Finally, I'll just say that the emergence of adoptee immigrant identity it's not uniform. I'm talking about, an increase among some and a lot of, just as one adoptee cannot speak for all adoptees, I'm talking about a particular subset of people. I'll also say that even though there has been a lot of great activism around fighting for adoptee citizenship, the folks who are fighting for it are not doing so in ideological alignment. There's what I see as two different branches that make a lot of sense going through the history and how we've been taught to think about our immigration or think about, how we claim identity. And I will kind of characterize those as a focus on adoptee equality and a focus on adoptee justice, which I see is quite distinct. One would see adoptees as, characterize them only as the children of American families. They would say that adoptees are not immigrants, and they tend to reproduce a good versus bad immigrant narrative because they say like we, came as babies and we deserve it more than other folks. And an adoptee justice framework, I think, can claim more of the organizing traditions, more of the women of color feminism and intersectionality movements, and takes more of a holistic view and recognizes adoptees as immigrants, as people of color, as people with a stake in working with non-adopted folks on issues that affect all of us. And they also more actively try and fight against reproducing this good and bad immigrant binary. These are sort of the takeaways. I don't know where I am on time, but all this to say that Asian American adoptee history and research and our identities and that we exist really matter. We're really intertangled with a lot of other broader stories about how American immigration, race, family, Asian American history has unfolded over time. We have a lot to blame for the contradictory ways in which lawmakers have encouraged us to see ourselves as not adoptee, as not Asian, as not immigrants, as just Americans, to explain why we have two very conflicting ideas or why over 70 years of immigration hasn't yielded an adoptee immigrant identity largely until now. Adoptees are not a monolith. There's a lot of differences in identification and ideology. And there's a subset who have responded to this sort of political moment of resurgent racist xenophobia through the Trump administration's assault on the immigrant community, family separations and deportations of adoptees without citizenship, and are working more actively to try and work with non-adoptees and just becoming generally more politicized. So thank you, and that's my presentation. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
All right, well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Emma. If anybody, Emma, you're a little ahead of schedule, so would you be willing to take a couple of questions if people have questions about your research now?
Sure.
Okay. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them in the question box, and Emma will take those questions now. Otherwise, we will go ahead and focus on our panel, but thank you again so much, Emma. That was amazing research, and I can't even begin to imagine all the effort and also emotional energy that you placed into this. Somebody does ask, how did you find people to interview for your research study?
Well, I had to fill out a form and kindly request that my university let me do this in an ethical way. And I had to take a bunch of classes to figure out how to do that online. But what it really came down to is I posted in some Facebook groups that adoptees were in. I asked some folks who I knew had been involved in thinking about themselves as adoptees, as immigrants. I put out flyers at the CAN conference, the Korean American Adoptive Family Network conference, that is not just for Korean American adoptees, FYI. I've emailed, they said I could come. You can probably come too. Just putting the flyers out. And then it was kind of like who was available in this like couple months of time that I had for the research project. And it's unfortunate that research gets constrained a lot by deadlines and time and money, but that's kind of how it is.
Wonderful. So then the next question is, were there any insights or patterns you noticed between adopted people who aligned with adoptee equality versus adoptee justice?
Yeah, I think people who sort of fall more into the adoptee justice camp had been thinking about they had been thinking about their identity for a while. I think a lot of times we talk about different awakenings, or that adoptee identity is really dynamic, and there's a lot of, different layers to identity to realize. I think folks who are really into adoptee equality, because of its focus on multiple issues like, gender and race and migration, they had kind of thought through and were more comfortable with an idea of intersectionality, which is just that your identity is complicated and has multiple dimensions, and they all count and add up to your experience, essentially. But I did notice that difference. And then I think also what you have exposure to, right? If you find the adoptee community, if you have access to ethnic studies, or you read a lot of books, or you're looking for folks who are interested in social justice, I think you're more inclined to join that. I think a lot of the problem with the adoptee community is like we're still figuring out what we don't have like a history. Our community is very short. We don't have the language to talk about a lot of our experiences. And so I think a lot of it's around that too.
All right, great. So yeah, I mean, if you think of any other questions that pop up, especially during the panel, in regards to Emma's research, please feel free to type them on in. But next, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on our wonderful panelists. And I do have some questions just to get the conversation going. But really, it's also a chance for all of our attendees to get to know our panelists. So you can always, again, type it in the question box. So I think one of the things that we're going to start off with is, Anissa, if you wouldn't mind sharing more about your story, because you're the only one on the panel who does not have citizenship. And I know that when some of the people who registered, they had read your bio and they were very interested in hearing more about your background. And some people hadn't even heard about what it means to be a deported adoptee. So they were very interested in hearing what that means. So if you wouldn't mind sharing as much as you feel comfortable sharing about your story.
Absolutely. How much time do I have? I mean, it is 50 years.
Oh, yeah, right. So in general, we have about an hour. We have a full hour for all of the panelists. So maybe, you can take about 15 minutes to share
Okay.
about your story. Yeah.
All right. So my name is Anissa Druzito, and I'm in Central America, Panama right now. And the Druzito, you can tell that is not from this area. I was adopted by a family here in Central America, Panama, that was in the U.S. Army. My father was a sergeant in the U.S. Army. He was stationed here at Fort Clayton. It's an Army base that was here in Panama, but now they're no longer here because of a treaty. I was born in Jamaica, and I was then brought to Panama by my biological mother. My biological mother was born here in Panama because my grandfather came over to work on the Panama Canal when it was being built. So he was the first Black tugboat driver. That is what I'm told, and that's what I will have to believe. So he was here. He had children with my grandmother. My grandmother developed cancer, and she didn't want to have her uterus removed. She wanted to go to Jamaica and die. So that's where Anissa joins the picture. I come along. My grandmother passes away a few years later, and my biological mother then decides to move to Panama instead of staying in Jamaica. The military was here. She fell in love with the military personnel. They went back to the States, and she abandoned my sister and I. We have the same mother, different fathers. So my biological father is Canadian. I never was able to meet him. He passed away when I started my search, and I found a sister. And so I was adopted, and I lived on the on the Army base for a couple years before my father got orders to then move back to the US. And all my sisters were excited, and I was excited too, because I was adopted where I was old enough to where we always thought that, you know, the US, everybody was rich, everybody was never hungry. And, you know, those are things that we struggled with in the orphanage a lot. So my family came along, adopted us. We got on my dad's military orders, and we went back to the US. Shortly after getting to the United States, I developed synovial cell sarcoma in my left calf. That's an extremely malignant cancer that is normally found in extreme sport, adults retired already, or people that did a lot of activity. I was neither one of them. But I developed the cancer, and because my father was active duty, we were sent to Washington, D.C. to have my amputation done at Walter Reed Medical Hospital. I had the amputation there, and then I had my treatment down in San Antonio, Texas at Fort Sam Houston. Then my father was put on orders again to return back to New York. We went back to New York. I graduated from school. I fell in love, or what I thought was love, with my first husband. I have a daughter. Her name is Vanessa. She's 28 years old. She is watching right now. That's always a stressor, because, you know, you don't want to cause any more problems to your child. But I had my daughter, and I had issues with domestic violence. So after being pushed down a flight of steps, I woke up in the ER, and Vanessa was next to me in a car seat carrier. She was less than 3 months old, and the government helped me get an order of restraint, removed her father, put us in a shelter for a while, and I went through all of that. I struggle a lot as a single mother. I always had a hard time making ends meet, making too much money, not to get assistance, but, you know, not making enough to cover everything. And we lived upstate New York, so that was very hard in the wintertime, you know, the electric bills and everything like that. So I would do odds and end jobs, watching kids overnight while their parents worked, you know, third shift, and, you know, different things like that. And, you know, making bad decisions all along the way. In 2003, after having a dollar store Christmas the year prior, I said, I'm going to get a second job, although I had a full-time job, to catch up on my electric bill. My car was broken down, and to give Vanessa, you know, a decent Christmas. So I got a job at a retail store, and I was working at the retail store, and a good friend of mine from high school came in, and she said, hey, I bought some stuff here, but I don't have the receipts, and I'd like to bring them back. And I bought them on a credit card. And I said, well, if she bought them on a credit card, I can just return it. It's not a cash transaction. The managers don't have to find out about it. And, you know, it's a second job, a seasonal job. And I really didn't care. I was tired most of the time, you know, just going through the motions. So after doing that once, it's hard for, if they come back, to say no, because you already opened that door. So I did it quite a few times. And once my seasonal employment was over, I, you know, stopped working my seasonal job and just started working my full-time job. The sheriffs came knocking on my door, and they said, are you Anissa Drusito? I said, yes. They said, did you work at this store? Yes. Do you know this person, which is my co-defendant? I said, yes. And they said, your accusations and blah, blah. And we went back and forth for a while. There were some accusations on days that I wasn't even working. So, you know, I said, you know, this, that, and the other. And they told me, come down to the sheriff's office. I was arrested, and they wouldn't grant me bail because they said I was a flight risk, and I didn't understand, where am I running to? My full-time job bailed me out after I went in front of a judge and explained to them that I was adopted and I'm not running anywhere. So after going back and forth with the public defender, I was offered a 1 to 3 sentence. My co-defendant that paid for a lawyer received 6 months of weekends. So I said to my lawyer, I can't do that. I'm a single mother. I could find somebody to watch my child on the weekends, to do weekends. I was mentally preparing myself to basically get a similar sentence. I wasn't thinking, going away from my child for a long period of time. He said, no, this is better because you'll go away for a month and a half. Your job has written you a letter and you'll be released on work release. It's not a violent crime. It's not drugs. It's not anything. They don't want people like you in prison. So don't worry, you'll be out soon. I went up to Bedford Hills in New York City for processing as a maximum security prison. And while I was there, they told me, Ripley, you have a visit. And I was like, a visit? I am from upstate New York, which is like 8 or 9 hours away. And I couldn't imagine who was coming to visit me. So I went down to the visiting area and there were about 3 or 4 gentlemen there. They said that they were from ICE. And I was so out of it as far as ICE, immigration. I had no idea. I mean, I lived upstate New York where there was more cows than people. I wasn't paying attention to like national news. When I got home, I had to try to see, what Vanessa was up to in school, make dinner. I was exhausted. I was going to bed. I wasn't like, following world news or anything like that. So they started asking me what border I crossed and what language I spoke. And I was like, I don't know what border I crossed. I speak English. What do you mean? And after a few more questions, I figured out that they thought that I had, snuck into the country. And I was like, oh no, I'm adopted. My parents are US citizens. I was adopted in Panama. My dad, I told them the whole spiel and they were like, oh, okay, we'll look into it and get back to you. So they kept processing me and they sent me to medium security prison, Albion in upstate New York, close to where I live. And I was there when they called me up for mail and I received an order of deportation and I was freaking out. I had 2 401ks. I couldn't imagine being deported with my child to either Jamaica or Panama because I left Jamaica when I was, probably under 5. I say probably because I didn't know my date of birth until after I was adopted. And I left Panama when I was, still a young child. What was I going to do? I barely spoke Spanish. I spoke enough Spanish to help, Dominicans and Puerto Ricans upstate New York help them fill out their paperwork and, for welfare or whatever. I didn't know how to speak adult Spanish, I guess I should say, and I still don't. And I said no, so I cashed out my first 401k. I hired my lawyer, and we were going back and forth to court. By this time, I'm in Hudson County Jail under ICE detention because I had already complied with my year in state custody. They turned me over to ICE. And one day I got up to go to immigration court. My lawyer said, this is looking good. Don't worry about it. So I completely trusted her. When I went there, she wasn't there. And I started to have like a severe panic attack. I'm like, where is she? And they take me in front of the judge. The judge tells me that my lawyer had died of an asthma attack. And I'm like, it's 2005. Who dies of an asthma attack? So on the way back, the ICE officers had taken me back and forth so many times that they, I have one leg, I'm not going to run. That was, they said that I don't have to shackle you because you're not going to run. That was kind of like a joke. And they would, talk to me or buy me a burger, something on the way back if they stopped or whatever. And so on my way back, the last time, the officer said to me, Rip, because my last name was Ripley, going through all of this. So he said, Rip, what are you going to do now? And I said, I'm going to cash out my next 401k because I have to get another lawyer. I can't be deported. He said, you're not the first adoptee through here. You won't be the last. You have had no visits, no packages. You don't have a support. he says it's best for you to fight this from the outside. You're stuck in the infirmary. You're locked in 23-1, meaning 23 hours locked down, 1 hour out to use a phone to bathe and to go back into my cell. Sewage would back up into the infirmary because the infirmary is in the basement. And he goes, and you've been away for your kid. And I said, yeah. I said, I can't. I mean, I wasn't thinking about taking my daughter back to a third world country where here in Panama, we were sexually molested by my uncles. I mean, there was no way. I couldn't even think of one reason or one way that I could come back to any country besides the US. It's the only one that I knew. Then I, heard that my daughter was giving some problems, and of course she's giving problems. She's separated from the only parent that she's ever had, and I can relate to that with my adoption trauma and everything. So after thinking about it, I asked the guard to call for the sergeant, and I told the sergeant I needed to speak with ICE. I told him that I was going to sign to be deported. So I signed the papers. 2 to 3 weeks later, I was woken up like at 2 or 3 in the morning, put into a van, driven to JFK, and we all sat in the van. And when it was our time, they would pull up to the gate, and the ICE officers would jump out with whoever was going to get on the plane. So when it came to my turn, they took me to the gate. I got on the plane. They gave me my birth certificate, and that was it, a handwritten birth certificate. So I was deported to Jamaica in 2006, March of 2006. I got to Jamaica. Jamaica didn't want to accept me because I don't sound like a Jamaican. I don't look like a Jamaican. I had to go through my question over and over. It seemed like hours. I was finally let out in Kingston, and I am supposed to be from Montego Bay. I don't know any of that, but that's what they told me. I was going to Montego Bay. I ended up in Kingston. My family there, my aunt was contacted by somebody from the church, and they sent somebody to pick me up from Kingston. My aunt didn't want to come pick me up because her husband didn't want a white woman in the house. And I had to stay in the park and wait until dark to go into their house and wait until he left to work to be able to leave. I got my second 401k cashed. Or sent to me, not then cashed. I got an apartment. I was trying to survive, but I don't know how to prepare the local food. My rice game wasn't where it was supposed to be. I was making rice pudding. And when I went to the store, I would go straight to the American food aisle. And if I wanted macaroni and cheese, it's going to cost me $4 a box versus $3 for $1, 3 boxes for $1 at Walmart, before I was deported. So I was flying through my 401k. I had zero help. Actually, my aunt would come to me and ask me for money to borrow. And I would lend her money from what I had because I thought that she would want to be a part of my life if I did that, or she would be nice to me, or, I could count on her for something. So I was down to my last $1,000, and I went to an internet cafe, and I found that Panama had call centers that I could work in. I speak English, I can do that. So I bought 2 tickets. I had to go get a travel document from the embassy in Panama, from the Panamanian embassy in Jamaica, because Jamaica didn't want to give me a passport because I still have my handwritten birth certificate, and they still don't believe that I belong there. So I got a travel document. I came here to Panama. It was the hardest thing that, you think, yeah, we can go to Panama and I can get a job. Yeah, it's not that easy because I'm still in like American mode. You can move from, I don't know, North Carolina to DC, like me, and it's okay. So I get here, culture shock all over the place. I couldn't speak Spanish. My daughter couldn't speak Spanish. She was freaking out. I was freaking out. I started working at a call center making $3.47 an hour. I couldn't afford to pay for my daughter's education. She couldn't go into local schools. I had to put her in private schools. And it was $174 a month plus $250 in rent, and my bus and food, and it was very hard. When we got here, Vanessa was 13. When she turned 17, a friend of ours approached us and said, "Have you thought about sending Vanessa back to the US to get her GED?" And of course, I had never thought about sending my only child, my DNA, the reason that I fight, the reason that I, my will to live away, of course not. And my husband and I were in bed and we were talking about it, and I had to put my selfish desires aside and think of what was best for her. If she stayed here, she would end up working at what call centers. There was no future for her here. So I sent her back to the US. And that's 10 years ago. And the hardest thing about not being able to see her on a regular basis or share with her is that we only get to see each other every 2 to 3 years, depending on her tax return. We haven't had a holiday together in 10 years because her ticket cost over $1,000 just to come down here for the holiday season. She has to shop around to be able to come down, and we were supposed to have Christmas in April this year, but COVID didn't allow that to happen. So it'll be 4 years before I see her again. And that's very hard. My only hope is that this bill will make it through for me to be able to go home and see my daughter. I'm very grateful for Adoptees for Justice and everybody on this panel that fights for this bill to go through so that I can go home. I got to say goodbye to my oldest sister on March 8th as she died of cancer over a video call. I have one other sister that's waiting for a pathology report for breast cancer after she just overcame colon cancer. I thank you guys, and for everybody that's listening, this is not just for me. This is for Mike, that's in Ethiopia, Mauricio, that's in Costa Rica, Ernesto, that's here in Panama also, Frank, that's in St. Kitts. I would like to think that it's just me that's gotten this bad luck, but it's not. Mike in Ethiopia has 4 granddaughters that he's never met. And I don't know if you guys can wrap your head around how we're living out here day by day, feeling like we're promised tomorrow, because the things that are near and dear to you are very far away. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for giving us this platform. And anybody that wants to help can go to adopteesforjustice.org. You can volunteer, donate. We will accompany you to go to your representative's office. Emma and the comms team has done a kick-ass job. You can do so much by just a click. It's amazing. And this is coming from somebody that's probably your mother's age that can, YouTube and Google. Aside from that, I can do a lot of activism work with a click of a button because of our comms team. So I thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Anissa. And again, thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining, but especially you, Anissa, for sharing your story. Wow, I can't even imagine everything that you've gone through, and also your daughter, everything that she's gone through. I can't imagine being separated for that long. And I think I would hope that all the attendees will really realize how important it is. And you mentioned the bill. And so that's the next question that I have is, what is this bill and why is it so important? I think, you kind of alluded to it, and, adoptees without citizenship, but you're the experts panelists. Can you talk more about what is this bill? And again, why is it so important? So I don't know which one of our wonderful panelists would like to answer that.
Hi. So I think it's important to actually get a little background about why this bill, where this bill comes from. So there was a bill. So there was a bill in 2000, I believe it was, and it was called the Child Citizenship Act. And it was people realized before that bill that there were a bunch of adoptees that didn't have citizenship. They didn't have citizenship for a variety of reasons, right? The agencies didn't communicate with the parents. The parents assumed that they adopted kids because that the kids that they were adopted had citizenship automatically. There was no the agencies for the U.S. government that facilitated international adoptions back when it started was like 4 or 5 different agencies, and we all know that the government agencies are not great at talking to each other. So there was a lot of miscommunication between the agencies on the government side. And so you had kind of a perfect storm of miscommunication, apathy, assumptions, all these things that led to kids not having citizenship. So then you had the agencies realized that this was a problem, but they realized it was a problem because of adoptive parents who knew that who understood. But the problem was that this is a general problem in the adoption arena, is that we're always thought of as children and never as adults. And so when the bill was created in 2000, it made everybody 18 and younger automatic citizens. Well, that's great, but we don't stop our lives at 18, right? So now you've got a whole other group of people who don't have citizenship, and they're not covered by this bill. So I forgot when the next iteration of a citizenship bill came, I think 2016, 2015, and it was primarily spearheaded by adoptees themselves, not adoptive parents, not the agencies. And then, so that didn't work. That didn't make it through Congress. A subsequent bill also didn't make it through Congress. But now we're at the point where, one, we've raised great awareness about this problem. I mean, we still have a long way to go, obviously, but there's a heck of a lot more people that know about this bill now than have ever known about it before. And two, we've got a growing coalition of adoptee groups, and it is led by adoptees, both with citizenship and without citizenship. And we have some adoptee parent allies, but that's not the bulk of the constituency that's pushing for this bill anymore. And so that's why it's really a really unique bill in the adoption world, because it's actually adoptee led.
Right now, our bill is in Congress, and it is waiting to go to be scheduled for the Judiciary Committee to write it up, mark it up, and take a vote. We have an expiration date of December the 10th, and we are trying to put as much weight as possible on the bill to get attention to it, to demonstrate how important it is. Right now, we have 95 co-sponsors and a lot of support. We're still looking for as much support as we can get on the bill, especially with the newly elected people in those areas. We're looking for constituents so that we can go in front of them and be able to get more co-sponsors on this bill. This bill will cover everybody that was legally adopted, and it'll make a pathway back for those of us that have been deported to be able to come back to the United States, whether it be through automatic citizenship or pathway to LPR status, and then work towards our citizenship. We, the deported community, would just like a chance to be able to go home and, you know, start over again. So this is why it is very important to get this bill passed. There are a lot of people that don't know the consequences of a simple fraud case or getting into a fight and maybe hitting somebody with a bottle, or, you know, something that as a citizen you would think so frivolly of, that can land you in the same position that I'm in. And this will take care of all of that. There's thousands of us, but a lot of people don't want to come out and share their stories. I know an adoptee that she's not certain about her story, but she went through a messy divorce. She doesn't want her husband to know anything about her possible not having citizenship or her possible status that is hiding. Also, those of us that are deported to these countries, we can't be very vocal. I can, I don't care. But for example, our deportee in Ethiopia, he has to hide in the shadows. Nobody knows in Ethiopia that he is deported, because if he does, he won't be able to rent a place. He won't be able to find a job, because he will be looked down upon as, you know, a very bad person that was deported. There are people in the US that have order of deportation that their country will not take them back for X or Y reason, but that order of deportation hangs over their head, because we never know when the government is going to whisper something sweet in one of these countries' ears, where they'll show up at, you know, this person's house and pick them up and take them away. And, you know, that's a horrible, nerve-wracking life to live. I mean, I think it's bad here, but I think living like that is even harder. So this is why this bill is needed so desperately to be passed. We are hoping for the worst, for the best, and preparing for the worst. If we're unable to get it through this year, we plan on, you know, presenting the bill again in January, and, you know, keeping in touch with our co-sponsors and making sure that everybody is still on board. And hopefully COVID will die down and we won't be hit by any other natural disasters or whatever, and we'll be able to get this through. There is tears, blood, and sweat that is on this board by not just one person, but by many of us that have volunteered with their talents, and that have volunteered, that know a lot of people, people that, you know, are movers in the community, in their communities or whatever. We have been very fortunate to have a group of people that are willing to, you know, knock on doors and do whatever needs to be done. So anybody that is interested, Emma has included a link in the chat for you to be able to help. And we're not asking you to help and leaving you out there. We're asking you to help, and we're holding your hand every step of the way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I know that you guys have mentioned various ways, you know, it's just a simple click of a button, and that's how easy it is to help support this bill. But is there anything else that people can do to help with the passing of this bill, or actually, you know, even getting this word out?
I think that, you know, the biggest thing that we've noticed, I think every one of us have noticed, is like when we talk about the bill, so many people are super surprised to hear that there's adoptees out here without citizenship. I've gone to many representatives' offices and talking to their LDs, their legislative directors, and they're like, I didn't realize this was a problem. Like, how many people does this affect? Yada, yada, yada. And I think for each one of us who isn't an impacted, like in particular about this issue, We all probably, I'm guessing, were slightly surprised to hear that this was an issue. At least for me, it was a surprise when I first heard about the issue. And that was about 4 years ago, when I started hearing things about people like Adam Crasper, about many other adoptees who are out there without citizenship. And, you know, I think when something that Emma talked about was like how each one of us sort of comes into recognition that we are immigrants, that we have a very shared sort of storyline and a very shared sort of vulnerability with a lot of the immigrants that are really suffering right now. I think for me, some things that like really were interesting for me to figure out was that like I am like 2 or 3 years within the limit of the Child Citizenship Act. If I was born 3 years earlier, I wouldn't fall under that protection. Thinking about my brother, who is a bit younger than me, who automatically got his citizenship as soon as he came into the country. And so for me, you know, my parents actually did have to go through the immigration process. And I actually did FOIA my immigration papers through as a part of my sort of family search. And what was interesting to me was things that my parents didn't even tell me about, you know, my adoptive parents, which was like their difficulties with dealing with INS and dealing with trying to get my citizenship, and them being like, hey, she's 6 years old. There's no way she's going to be able to take the citizenship test. Like, why are you asking her to take the citizenship test? And then also being like, hey, your office isn't accessible and it's literally like a half a day's drive away. We have, you know, 3 other kids that we have to take care of. There's no way we can take a day trip into Seattle to, you know, do all this documentation and have her complete some ridiculous test. And we spent, you know, years. Like I saw like tons and tons of letters from my parents saying, you know, like, hey, we're trying to get this paperwork done. They didn't get it done until I was 8 or 9 years old, and I was adopted when I was 3. So, you know, like understanding that like we're all on this precipice when we're transnational adoptees, where, you know, a roll of the dice could have meant that we would be in a totally different situation, which I think is why it's been so important for us to speak out, and then also to just educate people. Because, you know, again, for me, I had no idea that my parents spent this much time trying to get my citizenship. There's so many other people out there who just don't understand that this is an issue. And that is actually a wider issue than we would even assume that it would be, you know? And so, you know, I think that, you know, just being able to talk about this issue with people that you know, making it a wider known issue, is a big part that we would like folks to do. If you have social media, share stories. We have tons of stories on our website from adoptees who are impacted by being deported. And then, you know, also just talking to your representatives, sending them a quick email. You know, you don't even have to meet with them in person. You can send them an email. You can call them on the phone. It doesn't have to be a big lug for you to be able to just, you know, push in the right direction for this bill.
The other thing that I want to touch on quickly is Adoptee Bridge, is that also when we're deported to these countries, we are treated as US citizens. We're not seen as nationals. I speak Spanish now, but I have an English accent, so they call me gringa. They think that I am an American. And gringa stems from when the soldiers first came here, they had on green and they would say go. So green, go. And so I am seen as a gringa. And what would what somebody would charge somebody without an accent, for example, to repair electric or plumbing or whatever issue, they would charge me probably double or triple because they think that, I'm an American and that, for some reason the US sends me a check every month. And we are discriminated against. For example, we just went through COVID and they were going around giving out bags with rice, oil, just like the basics. We never received anything like that because the locals know that this is where the Americans live. My ID that I have a PE, Panamanian born abroad. So again, we're discriminated against because we think, they think that I have money coming from outside of the country. Had it not been for my daughter sacrificing her travel money that she had to come see me in April in Adoptees for Justice COVID Relief Fund, I really don't know how we would have eaten or paid electric or just covered our basics. And that is something that we also need to understand that, we are here, but we don't really belong here. I don't like the culture. I don't like all the fireworks. I don't like the loud music. I don't, it's like, this is not my culture. I was taken from here, reprogrammed. And then, when I misbehave, I got, tossed out. And I guess that was always a fear as a child growing up, that I would misbehave or say something my parents didn't like and they would send me back. And here I am, So another part of the whole deportation thing.
So that brings up, another question that we had was with Anissa, before you were deported, and then looking at all of our other panelists, do you consider yourselves, I guess you could say proud Americans, or do you like to be called Americans? Or how do you identify? How do you identify in terms of your nationality?
I never thought I was an immigrant until the country made me understand that I was. It never crossed my mind. I think I shared this with Emma when we first started talking. I never imagined myself to be an immigrant because immigrant to me was not what I was. I was taken to the country. I think Emma had said, we didn't choose to come to the country. We didn't migrate for a better life. But I identify as an American. I don't like, I have two friends that they speak English, and a song, they'll put a song on and they'll sing it. It's songs like their mother used to clean to. Like my daughter can sing probably all of Purple Rain album because that's what I would put on while I was cleaning. And I look at them and I think, oh my gosh, I wish I knew those songs and I wish I understood what they were saying. I go out in public and I just feel like I don't belong here, like it's just foreign to me. And being a person with a disability in this country, walking with a prosthetic leg in this heat and on the sidewalks that are all broken up, and it brings out my disability, and I just feel like I'm visiting and I've overstayed my welcome, and that's basically what I do. I don't feel like this is me.
Thank you, Anissa.
I'll share.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Anissa. I'm like very unsure still. I think that's something that I've been going through my entire life. I'm half Russian and half Kazakh. I was born in Russia. But like my physical disconnect from those two countries, the fact that my mom has made very sweet efforts to connect me with culture, but I've always like rejected it. I think it has made it really challenging to identify one way or another. I usually like make jokes about Mother Russia, but I like have operated my entire life as an American. I'm like always so excited when I see another Kazakh person or like a Asian presenting Russian, because I like ask them if I look like someone from the country. I ask them um, anything about. I'm like desperately looking and seeking for kind of that connection to that community. Um, so yeah, I think that that's like a really. I'm still in the process of figuring it out, and I think when Emma was talking about this ambiguity and this narrative of the American dream, that really resonated with me, because I am not a traditional immigrant. I do not have that experience. I have not experienced a lot of the strife and challenges that many immigrants face every single day. However, at the same time, I also experience a lot of the confusion, a lot of the like adoptees are torn apart from their families, from everything they knew as babies. And so there's also this kind of longing to find a community and to find a culture that you can identify with. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Olivia. And any of our other panelists, would you like to share about how you identify, or if you're still on that journey?
I think for me, I mean, I would say this is a continuous journey. Um, I think I started as a child being very reluctant. I went to Korean language school, got bullied there, and was just like, this is not for me. I am not going to connect with this pathway, etc. My parents, I think it was hard for them to, understand how to get me reconnected. They did what they could, but I think it was just difficult. And I think, there's still like a lot of systemic racism that goes along with growing up, as a transracial adoptee. And so it wasn't probably until I went to college that I had any opportunity to reconnect with sort of being an adoptee and being from Korea. Um, and I had this friend who was in this acting troupe, and she just started like riffing with me about these stereotypes of being Asian. And it was the first time that I got to like really interact with somebody in a loving manner about being Asian, right? Which was a weird thing because I still felt like a fake or a fraud, I guess. I didn't feel like a true Asian American, I guess. And so, she spent a lot of time just like joking with me about Asian stereotypes in a loving manner, like an in culture like manner. And she just like made it like me learn to grow to, connect with the community, right? And so like that was an amazing experience for me. And it allowed me to continue to spend more time looking into that. And then got to know a bunch of other Korean Americans who were immigrants, and, then got to learn about other Korean adoptees. And I had this really interesting conversation with a Korean adoptee who, uh, uh, their name is Jason. And we were sitting there and I was just talking to them, and I was like, I was having some frustrations with some of the API organizations that I was working with. And I was like, like I just feel like a fraud when I'm there. Like I don't feel like my story resonates with a lot of the people in these groups. And like I just can't resonate with them on their family nuclear experience of being immigrating into the US. And so when we're having this conversation, they were basically just were like, our story our adoption stories are part of the Asian American immigrant story. And we need to take ownership of that and stake claim as an Asian American, and that is part of our story and part of the Asian American story, and that we need to push to make sure that organizations understand that our stories are just as, just as resident, just as real as their stories and their immigration stories. And that was when I was like, okay, I feel like I'm okay with claiming that I am an immigrant. I feel like this is something that I can take ownership of and reclaim for myself. And so it was a real like powerful moment for me. And I think, just seeing what was happening on the border just, really resonated with me. I wrote an article on it, on just the trauma that was happening to these kids, and being able to say, like, especially seeing people who were like, let's adopt these kids who are being stripped from their parents, and how much that tore up not only me, but so many other people in the Asian, not in the adoptee, transnational adoptee communities, who were talking about like how much this was re-traumatizing them, and the fact that I just think about like the massive amounts of like anxiety and mental health that I had coming to the United States and not knowing this country and being stripped away from everything that I know, like really resonated with me. And that's why I wrote up a story about just like how being stripped from your biological family and your culture is traumatic, and how it impacts you years later as an adult. And so, yeah, I think I'm hoping to continue to learn and to grow into my identities. But yeah, I see myself as a Korean American. I also see myself as an immigrant. And then lastly, I see myself as a transracial adoptee. And I stake claim proudly in that, because there's power in being able to identify within a group, and to be able to say, like, we deserve to be seen and to be visible and to have our voices be heard, because so often people are speaking for us. And it's something that we talk about, like in NAM all the time. It's called National Adoption Awareness Month, and it's sort of like, but that always takes away from our voices. So any of these awareness should really center on adoptees. So yeah, that's been my story.
Woohoo, thank you, Mia. I feel so empowered. I feel so empowered now with all of you panelists, but especially with you, Mia. All right. So do any of our other panelists want to answer this question?
Sure, I'll
Otherwise,
answer.
Oh, okay, awesome, AJ.
So I guess there's kind of 4 main points in my life where this question has it's kind of gone in a different direction. So I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, very white. But Madison is where the University of Wisconsin is, and there's lots of Indian people there. And so my mom, Thanksgiving every year, would call the school, imagine this, and say, our family has 3 adopted kids from India. Can you give me the names of your Indian international students who are not going to be going back to India, or just names of people who would want to come to our house for an American Thanksgiving, so that the cultures can blend? And so growing up for 14 years, every single Thanksgiving was my family, my 2 white parents, 3 Indian kids, and then a bunch of random Indian university students. And so that was interesting, because they kind of saw an American house, and we kind of saw brown people besides our own siblings for the first time. And so then various times my parents would try and take us to Indian cultural events at University of Wisconsin. And, we basically were like, we're not going to do this. We just want to be normal kids. We're not interested in knowing our identity, whatever. So, but then kind of overarching all of that was this family dream to all go back to India together. And my parents had lived there in the 70s, so they had a bunch of people that they already knew. And we were going to go back and visit orphanages and, see the land and everything. So that was kind of the family dream. So finally that happened my junior year of college. And I'm the oldest by 5 years. So my brother was like in 8th grade or something. And my sister's 9 months younger than me, and she's a year behind me. So we're both in college. My brother's in 8th or 9th grade or something. And we go back to India. And that's the first time that I ever really kind of identified as Indian. And so that was 2001 for like a month and a half. That's also the time that India started to really rise on the international stage. And so you started to see more Indians. Indians were running Fortune 500 companies. They were in the news, all of these things. So my pride in kind of being Indian was growing as the profile was growing. And so I went to India and I fell in love with the country and the culture. And I was like, I can't wait to come back here and live for a certain amount of time on my own as an adult. So then I went to grad school. Towards the end of the grad school, I realized I hadn't done any internships and I needed to do one. And so I thought, well, I'll just do one in India. So I emailed this a random Indian NGO, said, hey, if I come and pay for everything, can you, set me up with a desk and, I'll do whatever you want me to do. Anyway, went in 6 months, 2011. And this is 10 years later, 2011, 6 months, and interned with a human rights NGO. Well, one of the consequences of that was that my coworker, who was my translator, because I don't speak any Indian languages, my parents are white, she ended up becoming my wife. So now I've married a culturally Indian woman. I'm starting to really fall in love with the culture that I am as an Indian, but I have a very different take on it than she does, obviously. So then we're building a life together with kids, and we are kind of incorporating both Indian and Western culture in our house. And now people come to me and I'm kind of their gateway to the Indian culture. And it's just so strange to me because for so long, one, I pretended that I wasn't Indian, and two, I still feel like the Indian community doesn't accept me at all. So we have all these kind of non-Indians that are like, oh, I'm going to an Indian restaurant. AJ, what do I need to order? And I'm like, oh, blah, blah, this is great. This is great. Actually, why don't you just come to my house? Because my wife is an amazing cook. But anyway, so we have all of these things going on. So then we're raising our kids with both languages and 3 or 4 languages. And my wife is very Indian. And she says stuff like, I don't think that way because I'm an Indian woman. And the way that we were raised is so vastly different. So it's been a journey, like everybody else has said, and it's been really fascinating to see the ways that it's kind of just kind of ebbed and flowed over the years, because for so much of my life I was like, no, I'm brown skinned, but like, look, I'm an American as you can possibly be, right? I love football and blah, blah, whatever. And now I'm like, well, no, actually I'm an Indian because I was not raised there, sorry, I was born there. I have Indian blood in me, but I was, raised in America. So I have all of those things. And then the other thing that's interesting is that I can actually move between both cultures in a way that most people can't. I mean, Indians can't, right? Indians can't go hang out with a bunch of white people because they don't really get it, culturally Indian. And my wife has a hard time with that. And my wife has a hard time with the fact that I can and she can't. So anyway, we just navigate a lot of these different things as a couple and as a family. But it's been a really interesting it's just watching the cycles of all this go down over the years, and it continues to occur.
Thank you so much, AJ. That was really, really insightful, especially hearing your journey, especially how you met your wife. That's very interesting, especially on your journey. All right, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to utilize that chat box. Otherwise, what I'll be doing is I'll be asking our panelists if they have any last minute thoughts or words that they would like to let everybody know, whether it be about adoptee citizenship, about this bill, adoptees as immigrants and their immigrant identity. Olivia, yes. Are you raising your hand? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, trying to do it steadily. I really wanted to just kind of piggyback off of what AJ was saying about how the Indian community doesn't necessarily accept him. And I think that has a really large role to play in identity and how we identify as adoptees. So that really resonated with me. I grew up in a kind of secular Jewish community in Los Angeles, and I went to both a Catholic high school or Catholic middle school and a Jewish high school, and I really experienced the gambit. But I was never accepted as a Jew or as an Asian American or as a American or as a white person or as a person of color. I was never like, people were like, what are you? I got that all the time. Where are you really from? And I was like, I told you, Russia. And I think that really had a lot to do with the fact that I never truly, I still like cannot figure out who I am. But I wanted to share a quick story. I don't think I've ever told her this, but when my first interaction with A4J was at their annual conference, or no, not conference, gathering, convening, where we strategize, thank you, retreat. And I sat down next to one of the amazing members, Amanda, and we sat down that first night. We were all exhausted. And we were talking about our stories. I asked her deep questions that I would never ask on a first time meeting someone. And I told her my entire story. I went through the whole thing. And that was the first time that no one's ever asked a question. She didn't make me feel uncomfortable. She didn't ask me probing questions that questioned my identity or my existence or my experiences. That was the first time that I was excruciatingly proud to be part of an adoptee community that accepted me, that never questioned anything about me, and that also understood my experiences in a way that no one ever has before. So I think that for non-adoptees, when you see adoptees and you want to talk about identity, I think not questioning, accepting, acknowledging experiences, appreciating their willingness to share their story with you. I think that would be my biggest piece of advice in a way that you can support people kind of coming into their own identity.
Oh my gosh, I totally 100% agree with you, Olivia. I think, I'd spent a lot of time avoiding adoptee spaces. But when I finally got to come in, Becky was the one that brought me in to Adoptees for Justice 2 or 2.5 years ago. And I remember being in the space and my anxiety levels just went down, which is a lot for an adoptee. Like, I kind of feel like all of us have a lot of anxiety anyway, especially in social situations. But like going into the space and just feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't feel like I have to explain everything and like talk about like I feel like there's a level of understanding where you just don't have to explain like the massive amounts of trauma that like you hide every day, and you can just be yourself, which has been super nice in adoptee spaces, is like feeling empowered by that and feeling like I can be my whole self. I don't have to just be an Asian American. I don't have to just be an immigrant, or I don't have to just be this or that, that I can just be myself. And I think that's what I love about adoptee spaces, is that we all sort of have this level of knowledge of where we are, and we all have different experiences, but I think we all like understand that we have a lot of things that we're working through, and that, you know, we can appreciate each other for just being there in the moment and supporting each other. So yeah, I totally agree.
All right. Does anybody else want to share any last minute thoughts or things that they would like to share with anybody? Thank you so much, both to Olivia and Mia. People can also ask a question if they would like in that question box. We have a couple minutes left. I do want to be respectful of the time.
Irene had raised her hand.
Oh, Irene, do you have a question? Oh, looks like it went down. Thanks, Anissa. All right, Emma, do you have something that you'd like to share?
Oh, yeah, I guess just it's really funny to hear, you know, I mean, I've known these group of people through A4J, and to just hear everyone's kind of like anxieties coming into the space. A4J was the first adoptee community that I joined that, yeah, like the first, you know, real one. And I feel like it's kind of become my social and political home. I never thought of like reconciling an adoptee identity with the other social justice values that I had, and finding a community of folks who were articulating that experience was really powerful. And it was really wild because I was in like a junior in college, and I had been like meeting with people on Zoom meetings, and then they were like, do you want to come to DC and meet a bunch of congressmen and congresswomen and talk about that? And I was like, am I going to get kidnapped? I guess if you pay for my plane ticket, sure. And then I just like showed up and met y'all. And it and I like dropped my wallet in the parking lot, like right after I got off the air. Like I didn't really feel like an adult ready to go meet new people. But you know, there is that kind of instantaneous adoptee bond, and people have called it like adoptee kinship. There's a feeling like of familiarity, like we've been through some sort of psychic terrain. You know, you went a different way, I went a different way, but like we both have that experience of not belonging, and that constant having to explain that. It does feel kind of like coming to a family or a home or something like that. I'd like talk a lot about this in my thesis and the other parts, but so like, I don't know, I guess it's like the long version of my thoughts, but just to say that that's really exciting, really powerful. But you know, it's also like we do have to make relationships and, you know, bonds with each other that aren't just based on like the really isolating and alienating experience of adoption. And so I think that's another challenge for us as we think about adoptee community, about how to make like lasting bonds that aren't just like built around like being neglected or unseen. And so that's like the other thing that I want us to think about and like move forward is, you know, how can we make adoptee community about like pride and joy and like love and positive things too, while like keeping space for all that too.
Anissa, this question comes from Irene. I don't know if you can see it in the chat box, but it's a question directed directly towards you. It says that.
Go ahead.
I'm a transracial Dominican American adoptee who was adopted from the Dominican Republic as a baby. I'm curious to know if there is a Dominican adoptee community that you might know of. I have noticed that the Dominican Republic and Panama are very rare places to adopt from.
I am not aware of any kind of group like that. There is a group, and Emma might help me with this, that is from Central and South America or something like that. I'm not sure of the name, but Dominican Republic, yeah, that's kind of like a special case. And Panama, there are a lot of Panamanian adoptees because the US was here in Panama for a very long time. I mean, orphanages in the 80s were chock full of kids. I remember that the youngest child that my parents adopted, that the law for 2000 did include, my mother got him at 3 days. So it was very popular to adopt here in Central America, Panama. The Dominican Republic, yeah, it's kind of a harder, but I kind of don't know much about those spaces. I just work with who wants to work with me. Adoptees for Justice is a cool mix of people that don't look like me, but they accept me. And so I try to overlook that. And I don't know a lot of foods that they talk about. and, but they forgave me for saying that I hate sushi. So, yeah, Emma put the link in the comment, and the best part about being an adoptee, and I could never think of it, is the community and the uplifting that I have, and not explaining myself. And you're going to find that whether it be in Adoptees for Justice or in the Central America, South America, I forgot what Emma said, I can't find it right now, but you know, reach out to them. There might be some Dominicans in there, and if not, I'm sure they'll be happy to have you. And if not, we're happy to have you, and we can talk about our lack of being able to prepare plantains and rice together.
All right, thank you so much, Anissa. All right, so this just wraps it up. We just have a few minutes left. I know that there are some requests about people connecting with you all on social media. So I know that Adoptees for Justice is very active on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I mean, very active out there. I mean, a lot more active than Adoptee Bridge is out there. So awesome social media content. But if you all are panelists are comfortable with people reaching out to you via social media, feel free to type in your, whatever you call it, handle, is it a handle or a link or ID in the chat box. Again, I'm not really technological. So put that in there, and then people can connect more and see, maybe more of the advocacy work you do either with Adoptees for Justice or in your other roles. I mean, these panelists don't just volunteer with Adoptees for Justice. They are amazing human beings and do other great things in life. So they're awesome human beings. I posted all of their bios on our website so you can understand a little bit more about what they do. There's that. And again, I just want to give a huge shout out again to all of our panelists and also, representing Adoptees for Justice and all of the advocacy work you do for adoptees and for trying to push this bill through so all adoptees can get citizenship. Really, it's without you guys and the work you do. I mean, so many people wouldn't have been educated about the work and adoptees lacking citizenship, and also adoptees and your identities as immigrants, and how our journeys are always flowing. And again, thank you to our attendees for joining tonight. Emma mentioned at the very beginning that she'd send me a copy of her presentation, and then I'll send a copy out to everybody who attended, so you can have more information about Emma's thesis. So I'll be sending that out within the next week. So big shout out to Emma and for sharing her honors thesis. That was amazing work. Emma also put a link in so you can learn more about her thesis in the chat box. But without further ado, this just wraps it up for tonight. Feel free to check out all the links. When I send out the follow-up email with a copy of Emma's presentation, I'll also include some of these links that were included in the chat box. I know that it's going really fast, so I'll include some of those links. I'll ask Emma, hey, what are some of the top links to send out to our audience? But other than that, thank you all so much for joining us. Go support the bill, go check out those links. And again, thank you all so much for joining us, and have a great evening. Stay safe and stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Bye.